welcome to Independent Green Party, Green TV. I'm Angela Trusty, your host for today's show. I'm excited to be joined by Audrey Clement. Audrey's here. We're going to be talking about Audrey in just a moment. In fact, I'll give a brief introduction to Audrey. We're going to be having a conversation about quite a few things today. Audrey is a former co-chair of the Green Party of the USA, and she is a current member of the Green Party of Virginia. Audrey has run for office 7 times and continues to consider another run for office. So welcome, glad to have you here.
And I'm glad to be here.
So we do want to say Happy New Year to everyone who is watching, and in the spirit of the new year, we actually, our producer Gail Parker, she went to Chipotle today and she brought back this bag that has such a lovely quote on it. I'm going to read it to you guys. It says, "We will never have a perfect world, but it's not romantic or naive to work towards a better one." And this is Steven Pinker, who is a Canadian-born, I believe it was neuroscientist who said this. So tell us, any thoughts that you have about this quote as you think about it?
Yes, well, that quote provides a great justification for running for office, even though I haven't won yet. Mm-hmm. A lot of people want to know, well, why do you keep on running? What is your point? Well, one of the things that I've done in my repeated runs for political office is to raise issues that the other candidates won't raise. Mm-hmm. And some of these issues are extremely important, as we will discuss later on. For example, the total lack of wind renewable energy in the state of Virginia. This is an issue that most of our elected officials would rather just push under the carpet. Because of Greens like me, these issues have come to the forefront. But they can only be adequately raised if candidates actually run for office. It's generally not sufficient just to go to your local county board and speak for a few minutes. You've got to put your money where your mouth is, and you got to run.
Yeah, I love that. I love that so much. You know, we got to talk, Audrey was on the show a few weeks ago, and we got to talk a little bit about what the status of the Green Party is. And one of the things that came up was the recount. This is something that has been talked about. It's been in the news. We've seen a lot of headlines about the Green Party and the independent Green Party because of the recount. Audrey, I want to give you a chance to kind of wrap that up. Tell us how things sort of landed with that.
Well, as you know, three recounts were initiated by Green Party presidential candidate Jill Stein in 3 states. Mm-hmm. Those states were Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And I believe only one of those states, Wisconsin, actually completed its recount, but none of these recounts were valid, and I'm going to explain to you why. First of all, in Michigan, 75,000 votes per president were not counted. Mm-hmm. All right. The margin of victory of Donald Trump was only about 10,000 votes. And most of these votes that weren't counted came from Detroit or the Detroit area, heavily black counties. So it is quite possible that the outcome of a valid recount could have turned the election to Hillary Clinton. That's point number one in Michigan. In Pennsylvania, 85% of the voters used machines that produced no paper trail. So it was impossible to conduct a recount for all intents and purposes, or a valid recount, all right? Another liability of the Pennsylvania recount system is that the candidate herself could not ask for a recount, only voters could after putting down huge sums of money. So the impediments to initiating a recount were, for all intents and purposes, insurmountable. And then finally, in Wisconsin, where I do believe the recount was completed, the recount, it was meaningless because they were done by machine rather than hand. Even though there was a paper trail, okay, that would have made it possible to conduct a hand recount. Election officials opted to do an electronic count, which is simply basically repeating the same exercise that produced the results which are in question. Okay, so for all these reasons, the recounts were either quashed or their outcomes were meaningless in the 3 states at hand. As a result of this, attorneys for Jill Stein wrote a letter to outgoing Attorney General Loretta Lynch asking the U.S. Justice Department to investigate the state of art of election apparatus in the United States with 3 recommendations. They want all voting apparatus to produce paper trails so that hand recounts are feasible. Secondly, they want automatic election audits. Now, an audit is not the same as a recount. It's basically taking a sample of the ballots cast in one form or another and validating that the actual record of the vote cast matches that which was on the ballot. Okay, and I don't know that they want this in all elections, but certainly it is indicated in most elections, or most close elections, sorry. And finally, they want to allow anyone who does seek a recount to require a hand recount, so that the results of the recount itself is not a meaningless exercise. And I think these are excellent recommendations. I think they are indicated, and I think that this document itself is sufficient justification for the recounts that most people think were a joke.
Yeah, that was going to be the next question I was going to ask you. Was it worth it? There was a ton of media around the recount and a lot of work, and you've got lawyers doing all this work. Was it worth it? And it sounds like you're feeling like, well, because of this, yes.
Yes, I think that the recount produced evidence of massive irregularities that should be addressed to maintain the integrity of our elections, which are at the basis of our supposed democracy.
Yeah, and and we talk about ways that there can be people working together across the aisle and things like that. I think that's something that all parties can agree on, that we need to have integrity in our elections if we're going to maintain this country, the democracy of this country. So thank you for that wrap up. Excited that we were able to kind of close the loop on that. And now looking forward, we've just had recently the Electoral College voted, and now we're looking forward to this next administration. So talk to me, what's on the horizon?
Well, it doesn't look good. And in particular, it doesn't look good for anybody who lives and works in the Washington, D.C. area. People in my age bracket may remember what happened when Reagan took over the government in 1981. There were massive RIFs, which stands for reductions in force, and we're going to see that, only we're going to see more of that. In fact, we are going to see Reaganomics on steroids in the coming months. And what the policy is going to be simply this: slash, burn, and RIF. And that's what's going to happen in the United States, and with a particular focus on the Washington, D.C. area. So folks need to be prepared for that. There's not a lot you can do about it. I think most of us will simply be reduced to making contributions to our local environmental groups, to our local civil liberties organizations. We can make donations to targeted charities, but we're in for heavy weather.
Okay. Yeah, we talked about sort of before the show, we talked about how we would know where the budget cuts are going to be making the biggest impact. So you're talking Washington, D.C. would be a big place. Any organizations that you are aware of that would be impacted by budget cuts?
Yes. First of all, let's get to the scope of it. The budget cuts are basically going to be driven by tax cuts, which were proposed by House Majority Leader Paul Ryan last June in the amount of approximately $2.5 trillion over 10 years. So that means budget cuts at a minimum of $250 billion a year for the next 10 years. Now, currently, the U.S. budget tax revenues are coming in at the rate of about $3.2 trillion a year. So roughly speaking, we're going to be looking at budget cuts of 10% a year. Now, it's kind of hard to wrap your hands around a number that large. Consider, for example, that the U.S. Defense Department's cut, or U.S. Defense Program's cut of that budget is about 15%. So we are going to be cutting in a range approximating that which is needed to maintain the U.S. military forces in the U.S. and overseas each year for the next 10 years.
Wow.
Of course, now the U.S. defense programs are going to be protected. They're not going to sustain most of the cuts. Most of the cuts are going to be in discretionary spending programs, okay, which will be cut across the board, and then entitlements like Medicare, whose authorizing legislation will be rewritten to reduce the amount of benefits that people will realize. Another thing that is absolutely going to go is Obamacare, and I heard that the Senate already acted on a bill last week to do just that, which is to eliminate Obamacare. So that's going to go. Another thing that is going to go, though not necessarily budget-driven, but ideologically driven, is the gutting of the Environmental Protection Agency. Now, I don't know if they'll actually eliminate the Environmental Protection Agency. I do not think they will, but they will gut it. And any program that has to do with climate change is going to be eliminated in that agency and other agencies of the U.S. government.
One of the things that we and appreciate that breakdown for people as they're watching this and they hear budget cuts, you hear these huge numbers like 2 trillion, 250 trillion. How do you get your mind around those? So appreciate that breakdown there. One of the things that we got to see on an earlier show was this conversation between Dr. Jill Stein and Ajamu Baraka. And they talked about how, we're outside of election season, past November 8th, what are Greens doing now to still be able to make an impact? As people who, they hear about these budget cuts, they hear about things happening in politics, maybe they're not pushing these wind jobs or solar jobs that they'd like to see in their communities. What are Greens doing right now to still be able to make an impact in light of some of the things that they know are on the horizon? Well,
Greens, many Greens are active in environmental advocacy groups and social advocacy groups, and I imagine they will continue those activities in those areas. There are 2 big marches planned for the D.C. area. One is coming right up, and that's the National Women's March. I believe that's largely a Democratic Party-inspired event. But then there's going to be a massive Earth Day march next spring, the details of which I don't know too much about. But I would definitely plug for that event coming up. Another thing that Greens can do that advocacy groups can't do is run for office. And the State Green Party is going to be running, I think, well, the Independent Greens are running a delegate, Ron Fisher for delegate, and I believe the State Party is running 4 candidates in other parts of the state for delegate. I myself am more interested in continuing my campaigns for Arlington County Board, but I'm open to suggestions. Anyhow, when you run for public office, you not only actually get an opportunity to, send your message to the voters, but you get a chance to challenge your existing elected officials and hold their feet to the fire.
Yeah, appreciate that. I know that viewers love hearing things that they can do to be able to continue to make an impact in their communities. For anyone joining now, just want to remind you, this is Green TV. I'm Angela Trusty, your host, and I'm joined with Audrey Clement today. We've been talking about the recount. We did a wrap up on the recount, got some great context around how that was still a positive thing, and appreciate you for breaking that down for us. We've also been talking about budget cuts and some areas where budget cuts will cause an impact in the Washington, D.C. area. I do want to kind of shift our focus. We know you're going to be running for office again. Tell us, what are some things that are going on for you from the community perspective?
Well, last week I attended a meeting hosted by the Arlington delegation to the State General Assembly. That's about a half a dozen officials who've been elected in this area to represent people from Arlington in Richmond. And they host this event every year to get feedback from their constituents, and it's actually quite an opportunity to speak out. And in this particular case, I raised the issue that our state delegates from Arlington have received no less than $26,000 in contributions from Dominion Resources over the past 4 years. And the only elected officials who have not received such funds are recently elected delegates Mark Levine and a gentleman by the name of Rip Sullivan. Now, the rest of them, the majority of them, have accepted large sums of money from Dominion, and this is cause for concern because Dominion is the principal reason why there is no wind turbine installations at all in the state of Virginia. In fact, several years ago, they actually purchased from the federal government a lease off the Virginia coast to prevent other competitors from exploiting the wind potential of that area, which is significant. And this raises in my opinion, that one act by Dominion raises questions about collusion, unfair competition, perhaps antitrust issues. I mean, there's some real serious problems with Dominion Resources. And that's why it's important not to accept contributions from Dominion until they change their act. I mean, I'm not opposed to the private financing of elections, although I do advocate public financing of elections. But when a company like Dominion has monopoly control over an extremely important segment of the economy and uses that monopoly control to bribe legislators, I think we got a problem. They have spent no less than $3.3 million on legislators across this state in the last 4 years.
And you had the opportunity to testify at it was a board meeting about this?
It was actually in the boardroom, but it was hosted by the Arlington delegation to the Virginia General Assembly, and it's about a half a dozen officials.
Okay. Yeah, it's very interesting to hear, as citizens that there are opportunities to do things like this in the cause of seeing a landscape, recognizing that there's something that doesn't set well and that is not good from a democracy point of view, and being able to speak out about it.
Yeah, and now if you're looking for a silver lining in all this, some positive takeaway, it would simply be this: Trump doesn't have to eliminate EPA. It doesn't have to scrap U.S. research into renewable energy, although it certainly will, but it doesn't have to. All it has to do is follow Dominion's example and bribe the legislators in legislatures across the United States, and there's no need to put the kibosh on renewable energy. It'll just automatically go away.
Yeah, that's a great silver lining. I think it's always good for us to look at silver linings, especially, and that was actually another question I wanted to ask you, especially as we are here at the new year. It's in January, many people are thinking about resolutions. What about you? Do you have any resolutions this year? It could be politically, it could just be personal. Any resolutions that you've been thinking about?
Well, I think what I'd like to do is clean up my website.
Okay, that's wonderful.
Make it look a little more attractive.
That's wonderful.
So if you know anybody in that business, please let me know.
Yeah, especially as you're running for office, I'm sure there are tons of materials that you got to put together to make sure that people know about you and know about the things that you're thinking about. As you think about running for office, any other issues that you feel are important to you that you want to address today?
Well, I think it's great that there is a green hour on Fairfax Public TV. Mm-hmm. I myself watched the previous show that was aired here today, or will be aired soon, and I was particularly impressed with the segment sponsored by Mid-American Energy, which is a major wind turbine manufacturer in the United States. And what the video basically describes the process of erecting one wind turbine, which takes 3 weeks from start to finish. Mm-hmm. And I was just amazingly impressed because it proves that it supports my contention that investment in green capital is what's needed to green the U.S. economy, and it does work. And also, this is just a minor detail, but Mid-American Energy is actually owned by Warren Buffett. And Warren Buffett himself is like Obama, all of the above. He doesn't care where the energy comes from, but he's a big investor in it. But the fact that Mid-American Energy could flourish under such an agnostic vision of the U.S. economy proves its absolute worth.
Yeah, I was really impressed by that video as well. I've seen some, as they showed the different components of the turbine going down the highway. I've been on highways before where I've seen that and just thought, wow, these are massive. But the video that we watched, it just showed so many different people who obviously had to have different technical backgrounds, showing them all coming together, working on something. That was the thing that I took away the most from it was, wow, there are lots of people who are obviously employed in this process. This is an undertaking to be a part of it, and it's creating jobs, creating energy. I was really impressed by that video as well.
Yes, and one other vignette is that I believe it was in 2013, the annual Green Party meeting occurred in Iowa City, Iowa, and it just so happened that my flight flew into a nearby airport in Illinois, and I had to drive maybe 20 or 30 miles to get to Iowa City, which I did. And as I was driving down the interstate, I believe it was Interstate 80, not sure, but in any event, I was driving down the interstate, and coming the other direction was a massive wind turbine caravan carrying wind turbine rotors, such as what we saw in the video. Mm-hmm. And to be honest with you, it brought tears to my eyes, because that's just what I want to see.
It's just what you want to see. That's lovely. For anyone joining us right now, I do want to remind you that this is Green TV, Independent Green Party, Green TV. I'm Angela Trusty, your host. We've got Audrey Clement here with us today. We've been did a wrap up on the recount. We also spoke about budget cuts and the impact that they'll be having in Washington, D.C. and other areas. And then we also got to hear a little bit about Audrey's community action. Now, one of the things that you've spoken about today, Audrey, is this idea that running for office is so impactful. Any advice that you could give to anyone who's watching this show thinking like, hey, I believe in this quote that they shared, this idea that, hey, I'd like to do some work to make this world a better place. Any thoughts on how someone who could get started, maybe they've never run for office before, talk about that process?
Yes, I did not start running for office until about 5 years after I had actually joined the Green Party. I worked on other campaigns, and that is the best way to go about it, because political campaigns are enormously complex, and they're very difficult to conduct. So you really do need to, you cannot just jump in and run for any old office. Also, it's best for minor party candidates, primarily because of the lack of resources, both financial and human, to run local campaigns rather than statewide. Now, of course, the Green Party, basically the National Green Party has to run a presidential candidate every 4 years, or it more or less ceases to be a national party. So I'm not actually trying to put the kibosh on that, nor am I trying to discourage people who want to run for governor, as I see that there are a number of Greens who want to do it. But if you're a rank and file Green like me, and do not have a lot of resources, the best thing to do is run at the local level.
And how do you find out about how do you find out about your local, what's happening at the local level, such that you can do that?
All right, well, in Virginia, you would go to the Virginia State Bureau of Elections website, and there's a link there, you can find it, that lists all the races that will be running this year, all the elections that are scheduled for every year, and they do change. There is a rotation. So this year, it's all the state delegate seats are up for election. And there are local elections, depending on what locality you're in, you may find a local election. Okay. One of the features of the Arlington scene is that it has a rotating county board, which means one seat's up for election every year. And so that's why I have run so often. More often than not, Green candidates are limited to running for local office for once every 4 years, and they can run for delegate every 2 years.
Okay, wonderful. So this is great information that we've been able to get today. I'm so excited to have had you join us for our show today, Audrey. Thank you so much for being here. We want to thank you guys for joining and for tuning in. Happy New Year. I am, again, Angela Trusty, your host for today's session. And that's it for Green Party Green TV.